What's up guys, BT Moto back with another ride review, and today I've got the 2024 KTM 1390 Super Duke R Evo. And I know that sounds like a mouthful, but this bike is a handful. Now the 1290, its predecessor, was an amazing bike and it filled a certain niche. I wouldn't say it was competitive with like the M1000RR or even the Ducati Panigale V4 Street Fighter. It fills its own niche, and it's really like a hooligan niche, because this bike makes so much torque. It is violent to the point where they make different riding modes that kind of lays the throttle on a lot smoother and doesn't kind of just give you an abrupt power unless you're in track or performance modes. Then speaking of electronics, they've done a complete sweep of the electronics in this thing. It has so many things they've added to this bike and functions they've added to this bike, including wheelie control. Now the wheelie control I found isn't that great. It has like a low, medium, high, very high setting, and then you can shut it off altogether, of course. Now even if I put it in low or medium setting, I can still clutch it up and it'll still loop the bike. But at least if I put it in a low setting, it helps you kind of land the bike a little more gentle. And it kind of does stop it a little bit, but it's really more like a suggestion rather than a limit. So don't get this bike thinking you can just rely on the wheelie control, just smack the throttle wide open and go, okay, this is cool, because you'll end up on your back. Now what makes this bike special is its torque, and it's an insane amount of torque. So let's talk numbers here. The 1390 is technically a 1350cc engine. Now what they've done to achieve that, to make it a larger engine than the 1290 for example, is they added 2 millimeters of bore, meaning the piston is a little bit wider, so we have bigger slugs. There's only 2 of them in this configuration with the V-twin, and with that KTM is claiming 190 horsepower with 107 foot-pounds of torque, whereas, wow, that was a weird move. Whereas its predecessor, the 1290, with 177 horsepower and 103 foot-pounds of torque. Now both of those torque numbers are absolutely insane, and you can feel it. This bike's mid-range is laughably fast, and I can see why they kind of dumbed down certain gears. I know because we're getting into tuning the bike. This bike has 65% of its throttle, or not 65, but 35% pulled out of the throttle limited. So you only get 65% in the first few gears. Then in 4th, 5th, 6th, we start tapering it with more and more power. I can see why they did that, honestly. Now, along with redesigning the motor, as far as putting a bigger piston in it, we have a redesigned head with actual variable valve timing. So the reason why they did this, and they didn't gain a whole bunch of power from it, even smooth power across the rev range, and this is to match those Euro 5 standards that are very strict, and they didn't want to lose what made the Super Duke the Super Duke. So they added that into the bike just to make sure this bike still felt violent on the torque, and man, does it feel insanely violent. So along with redesigning everything, they've also redesigned the airbox, and that allowed us to get a little more capacity to the gas tank of about a half a gallon, which is awesome. But also it added about a pound to this bike overall wet weight, comparatively wet weight to the 1290. So the 1290 about 466, this is about 467, so about a pound difference. But the headlight itself, let's say for example, took off a pound and a half. There's a few things they've done to make this bike lighter, but I think that wet weight's gonna hurt in the end if you fill this tank all the way up comparative to the 1290 for example. The price point of the 1390 is a little bit north of $21,000. Very good price. You get Brembo brakes, you get some decent suspension setup, and a lot of electronic love in this, including some braking features that people are complaining about the engine braking on this bike. And while this is not even close to as bad as the 1290, they've also added some preventative stuff into the suspension for this. So when you brake hard, what happens is this bike will stiffen the suspension on the front to make sure we're not getting a huge upset and balance in the bike, which is pretty cool too. And the tires this comes with are the same tires that come on our M1000RR, these 2CTs, an amazing tire. So right now we're testing stop and go usability of the motorcycle, and we're gonna go through a whole gambit of tests on this thing. So for those of you that are new to the channel here, what we do is we test the rideability of the motorcycle stock and then tuned. Now while it is in stock configuration, I'm doing these low speed stop and go testing, verifying certain things, seeing if there's any complaints I have with the motorcycle, and then we'll go do some top end stuff, see if I have any complaints there, see if I have any issues with the bike, and then what we go do is dyno test the bike and do 60 through 130 testing as well. And then post flash we do all of that over again to compare it to how it is stock. So we do 100 miles stock and 100 miles flashed, and we need to see benefits other than a peak number from this bike, meaning we want to see rideability features that shine through on our tuning, and a few other things that we want to get rid of as far as the stock tuning goes to make this a better overall bike. We basically want to do something that justifies us charging what we charge for our tuning. This is why we do 100 miles stock, 100 miles flashed. Make sure everything's good, make sure there are actual quantifiable changes to the bike. We aren't just dyno queens with these things. We actually take them on the road and do actual testing with GPS. Now back into the bike here and some rideability things I'm noticing from the bike myself here. The seat, not the most comfortable seat, but also not the most uncomfortable seat either. I mean, about an hour on there, your butt starts to complain, let's just say, from the seat. The riding position ergonomics feel comfortable. I would definitely do some adjusting on the rear set here. Rear set I'm having issues with if I tap it, because this is a reverse shift, meaning up is 1, and then down, 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 down to go to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now if I gently put my foot on it, this bike will start bucking, like right now. See, I'm making a buck right now, but I'm barely touching it. And that kind of reminds me of the Ducati quick shifter from my 2018 Panigale V4. That had this same issue where you barely touch the top of it, you're gonna make this bucking violent, you know? Another thing I noticed about the bike is the key fob. Now, it's a cool system, don't get me wrong, but there's a couple questions I have, and maybe you guys have the answer. But the only way to open the back seat, only way, is there's a switch under the back seat that you obviously need power for to get into the rear, or the passenger seat. When you get into the passenger seat, there's a lever to pull, or a string to pull, or a cable to pull, and that's how you get the rider seat up, and that's how you access the battery. Now, if your battery goes dead, how are you accessing the rear seat? Maybe there's a way to key something here, to touch something to something, and that will allow you to open. I have no idea, but just me looking around, I haven't read the owner's manual. That's the only way I saw to do it. And I've also noticed with the key fob as well, that it's, even though it's in my pocket, it's gonna say sometimes while I'm riding, it'll say no fob detected and give me a warning. And it's sitting here in my pocket in the middle of a ride. Doesn't make any sense. So there's a couple things I noticed right there that I don't like about the bike. I'm also noticing the down low rideability. This is very jerky. Now let's go ahead and put this into another mode really fast. Here, I'll put it in rain. Here, check this out. This is the funniest part about this bike. So now I'm in first gear. Normally if I whack first gear 100%, it's big trouble. Let's check it out now. It is so dulled down. That's first gear. Now, if I put this in track mode and do that in first gear, I'm going to be on my ass here in a second. Hold on. Well, let's put it in performance, because you shouldn't have to put it in track to get the full effect here. Let's put performance. There we go. So performance, first gear. Yep, go straight up in the air. Straight up in the air. Even second gear. I mean, look at this. I'm low in the RPM. Oh no, it won't go straight up in the air, but it feels like it wants to. A little more RPM, it'll go straight up in the air in second gear as well. Another interesting thing on this bike is cruise control. Check this out. I'm going to enable it. If I turn it on, oh, I have to be in a different gear. There we go. So if I turn this on now, there we go. It's going to try to get to 83 miles per hour. Now that's because it has a memory from the last time. I haven't seen this on any other cruise control of a bike before, but it has a memory. So if you key it on and you ride it and you're cruising at 80 something miles per hour, and then you're cruising at 40 and you turn it on, it's going to automatically go to the 83 miles per hour again. It's going to try to get there. Now, cruise control is only available on this bike from third gear onwards. So first gear will not activate, second gear will not activate, third gear will activate, and of course you can control the actual speeds with the plus and minus on the front and rear of the clip on here. I just thought it's an interesting way to do a cruise control on a bike. And yes, we will be testing the cruise control post flash as well, because I know some people are complaining saying that you don't get cruise control post flash. So now we test all the kind of like the cruising stuff with this bike. Let's test what makes this bike fun. Let's go ahead and get on the road. Let's get up to the top end stuff and test that and see exactly how far this motor has come. All right, so we're in the top end stuff now. You can see I'm in track mode. Let's see what this bike can do, huh? So initial impressions here, it's a stupid amount of torque. I mean, it will definitely get you into trouble. And you have to lay all over the front of the bike. If you do not lay over the front of the bike, the front end starts getting away from you. So it definitely is not something I would consider for beginners that are trying to go a track bike. The throttle on-off transition, very abrupt. Brakes are pretty good, honestly. These are Brembo brakes. See if I can get around this guy. Alright, there we go. Man, right up in the air. This bike definitely has some personality. This bike will kill people. For sure. I hit the rev limiter there and I could not shift. That was interesting. So much power. So much torque. It doesn't matter what gear you're in. The front end feels so light at all times. I definitely would not recommend this for any beginner, especially in a track setting. If you buy this bike, I guarantee you it's one of those things you're going to have to do and put it in rain mode until you really understand, have a full understanding of this bike, because this front end is way too light and the torque is way too violent. The throttle on-off transitions are just way too abrupt too. We got to smooth all this out. It's a scary bike. It's scary. So it's a good baseline for the top end there. Got a good idea what it's about. And that's torque, man. Look at this torque. Torque is silly. So now we saw the top end stuff. Let's see what the baseline 60 through 130 is on this bike. All right, I'm here with the stock 1390 doing the 60 through 130. Let's see what she does. I have her in race mode. All the nannies are off. You can see the wheelie controls off, 1-to-1 throttle. All good, all the nannies gone. Let's do it. All right, 60 through 130. Here we go. All right, 6.1, 60 through 130. It's very respectable for a stock bike. Bone stock bike with no tuning, nothing on it. That's very good. So now what we're going to do is take this thing over to the dyno, but I'm going to give you guys my last and final impressions on the stock of this bike. So overall, the bike is pretty comfy. It reminds me of a lot of other uprights. I really don't like the wind rushing against me. It's not really meant for the freeway riders. It's meant for the light-to-light guys or the urban guys. The guys aren't really planning to push this thing too far. And that's why I think we're getting a lot of this, you know, head shake on this thing sometimes. And it's really, I guess you could classify it as my fault for being lazy as far as seating position goes, but I'm just used to kind of not having to worry about it so much. But a lot of these naked bikes, you have to really lay on the tank very nicely and very evenly, and if you don't, it starts wandering away from you. They're not meant to hit these crazy speeds. Also, the 5-inch TFT right here, while it's cool, it just reminds me of the 1290 too much, and it's a far cry from the 6.5-inch offered in the 2020 S1000 RR. So I thought they'd kind of step it up a little more as far as the TFT goes, even though we have a lot of robust features now as far as slide control and a bunch of other stuff that is great. I mean, I can dull this bike down to the point where a beginner could ride it and it would be safe. I mean, to that point. But it's for someone that doesn't really know their limits and gets their confidence too fast, I think this bike can get them in trouble if they start turning all the nannies off. I mean, it is a violent bike. Throttle on off is violent. The torque just really shines through everything. I can see why they put the throttle limitations in first, second, third gear on this bike. The quick shifter is a little bit chunky to me. If you're in a hard acceleration, it feels good. But when you're in that low speed stuff, and maybe I've been spoiled too much by BMW, the low speed stuff it doesn't like too much. It just feels jerky, clunky. It still works just fine, but definitely a little bit clunky. And like I said, if you rest your foot on the shifter there, like on top of it, it will kind of like it's doing right now. I'm forcing it. Oh, I wouldn't shift the next gear. So see, feel it. If I barely touch it, it kind of has this hesitation in fifth gear, but it does that in any gear basically. Overall, I think this is a cool bike for stock, especially retaining all of that, all the personality it had for the 1290 while still complying to the new Euro standards with the variable valve timing and everything. They've really accomplished something with this bike, and it has a certain feel to it where you get this noise from the exhaust, you get this feel from the bike, and this neck-breaking torque. and it can only be Super Duke. That's why it's really in a category of its own, in my opinion. Even the V4 Street Fighter doesn't compare with something this brutal. And the M1000 Single R, for example, has no business being anywhere near this bike. Now, while that bike, we're talking about a circuit track, I think the M1000R would completely wax this bike. I mean, thoroughly. I think this bike is just a more fun, urban, light-to-light bike. So if you're not a guy that's on the track all the time, not carrying all that stuff, this bike is a lot of fun. I think it's going to do it for our pre-flash. So let's go ahead and take her to the dyno right now, see what she does there, pre and post-flash, and then go for our post-flash ride review. What's up, guys? I'm back here at Lee Cycle in San Diego, a BT Moto dealer, and I've got the 2024 1390 sitting on the dyno right now. And you can see I even put towels right here to make sure we didn't scratch the rear sets, make sure the owner is happy about that. This bike is gorgeous. Let's go ahead and see what she makes now. Stock first, then modded, and we're gonna do some cool comparisons. Man, is this thing a screamer. We are all wrapped up with a 1390. Sounds crazy on the dyno, even through the headphones I'm wearing here. It just screams right through them. It's hard to hear anything. Now, here's what we got. We got a peak total gain. This is a net gain of 4 wheel horsepower. You see right there, from 176 to 180. But that isn't close to the entire story here. You can see the stock creeps up all the way there, and that's where it's making that number stock. The blue line being stock, of course, and the red line being our mod file. Now check this out. This is crazy. In the mid-range here, sort of the mid-range, it's more the top end actually, but look at that gain. That is ridiculous. That's 12 wheel horsepower right there, and almost 10 wheel torque. 10 wheel torque is huge. On these bikes, it's massive. And look at the torque number. We're almost making 110 wheel torque. It's almost a 5 wheel torque increase from our stock baseline, which anyone that has these bikes knows that the torque number is, that's a stupid torque number for these bikes. And look at down here. Look how much we're gaining just on our regular rideability takeoffs. I mean, that's 15 wheel horsepower, and that's 10 wheel torque just on takeoff right there. Let's try the mid-range where we're always out, always cruising around. It's gonna be a little harder for me to do. Gotta zoom in a little bit because I can't really see the lines. But 88, 94, so that's 6 wheel horsepower right there. And yeah, that's torque, so, wait, 95. And there we are. I'm reading it wrong. I'm sorry. See, it's so hard once you get this zoomed in. So 95 to 88 right there. So we're dealing with 8 wheel horsepower. Am I right by saying that? That's 8? No, it's 7 wheel horsepower. I'm sorry. Jeez, I can't even talk today. And 94 torque and 87. So that's going to be 7 wheel torque right there just on the mid-range. And you can see it holds that through about the entire RPM range, these kind of gains. So from our stock baseline, we're smoothing everything out, getting everything proper, and you can see up top we've actually raised the red line a little bit because you can see this thing just wants to keep going, and we're just going to let it keep going a little bit. So we're making it stop a little shy of 11,000 RPM, which gives us more RPM, which means less shifting the track, just more of a power band basically up there up top, which this bike feels silly in the first place, so I can't wait to feel this when she's modded. Now, let's do some other comparisons here, because you can see I'm just doing this exact file here and I'm comparing it against itself, but now I've done so many bikes on this dyno, it's interesting to compare other bikes. Now, again, this is not same day testing, but it'll give you kind of a general idea here. You guys want to see a 1290? Let's check it out. So here's a 1290 right here, and check this out. We're getting 10 wheel horsepower over that stock Super Duke, and we had a slip-on on Kay's bike, and we have a slip-on here, the exact same Austin Racing slip-ons. You can see completely stock exhaust with valve and everything. It just has the slip-on. And you can see right here, these are the numbers from that. Now this is tuned versus tuned, which you can see we're making a lot more power than the 1390 everywhere. Look at that. You can see the 1290 here where it's losing power up top, and the 1390 just keeps steaming ahead with that extra displacement. 177 versus 159, and even on torque here, we're almost getting 10 wheel torque at red line. And there's gains across the entire board here, you can see. Crazy.
Now here's another interesting graph. This is actually the 1290 versus 1390 stock tuning versus stock tuning. And you can see it's almost the same all the way through the entire rev range, and you can see the 1390 right there kind of picking up at the very top end and kind of pulling away. Now of course a lot goes into our tuning, and a lot of the stuff we did on this bike was fueling, ignition. There's even limiters in each gear. So second, third, fourth gear have some good limiters in them. You can see right here, this is the same bike. This is the 1390. You can see red is our increased rev limiter, our more power, and blue is our stock baseline, but these are both fourth gear pulls, not fifth gear pulls. And you can see right there, we get massive gains in torque and horsepower across the entire rev range, where even at the top there, it's a little bit, nothing crazy, we're just getting 2-wheel there, but if you just look at the top here and say, oh, they gained 2-wheel horsepower, that's not much, but man, look at all this down here, it's crazy. These are different bikes basically, and then it peaks just 2 horsepower, but then it gains all that RPM as well. There's also D-cell fueling and blipper changes we have done to this bike. This bike has it's an electronic nightmare basically. There's so much electronic stuff going on in this thing. I mean, even if you touch the exhaust valve right here, I was trying to put the sniffer in there and barely touched it, and this bike goes into instant limp mode. There's so many little things about this bike that are just annoying, and we want to try to make sure it's 100% compliant, make sure it's 100% good. That way it's the easiest thing for you guys to do, and you KTM owners, you guys know about the magic box stuff. No magic box required, none of that stuff, and I'll be going over all the details of this flash in our ride review, our post-flash ride review, which is coming now.
What's up guys, I'm back on the 1390 post-flash. This bike feels completely changed now. As far as the power goes, jeez, it's coming off the ground in third gear, and the tip-in feels a lot less violent than before. This feels completely different than what we had there, and then the dyno graph shows it. And I know we're looking at the dyno graph there saying 180 our peak power and almost 110 foot-pounds of torque, which is absolutely ridiculous, versus the stock baseline of 176 wheel horsepower and about 5 less torque. And I mean, we saw the power there. We have such an enormous difference in power between the low and high end. It's basically 7 to 10 wheel horsepower and about 5 to 10 wheel torque throughout the entire range. It just kind of changes a little bit, but it's a gain throughout the entire range, plus the extra little RPM, which I think it needed, because when I was doing the top end stuff there, I just kept running into it. Like it wanted to keep going. And you can see there on the dyno graph too, it wanted to keep going, but it just hit a wall. So we just went up to 11,000 on that, nothing crazy. Now I know a lot of people, they have questions, things like that, about how we do the flashing without using what they call a magic box, a bunch of other modules to make this work. This is just flash, and that's all it is. There's just flashing, and that's all there is. There's no servo buddies, no nothing on this bike, no magic box. It's just our flash on it. No issues, everything still remains functional. When I get a little more speed or a little more space here, I'll go ahead and show you guys the cruise control. And there's cruise control at 46 miles per hour. Let's bump her up to about, I don't know, 50. There we go. And cruise control is working, guys. Flash bike, cruise control, 100% working, just so you guys know. This overall, I'm in performance mode, and it just feels a lot smoother throughout the entire range. More predictable, I guess you could say. Instead of me sneezing, going, and then the bike just goes straight up in the air, or it really jerks, it's really not that bad at this point. And I have it in performance. We'll put it in track when we go to the 63-130 and when we do the testing the top end. And we'll get a real kind of idea of what it feels like in the top end for tip in. Now a lot of the stuff is gear by gear limiters we saw on the dyno there. That second gear stuff, third gear, fourth gear, first gear, there's limits in these things, and then it slowly tapers off in fifth and sixth gear with no limits. But I mean, I can see why they put the limits in there, but the way we have these throttle transitions and the way we have the throttle response on the bike, this feels great. This is an awesome compromise to give you all the power you want still, and not sneeze and worry about the bike coming out from underneath you. The quick shifter feels smoother, but that could be just a placebo effect. I mean, it does feel a little bit smoother actually. I've been trying to mess with it, and it does feel smoother. And we got this constant low RPM stuff here, where we got a really low RPM cruise. It feels good at a low RPM cruise. Yeah, it does feel smoother going up in the gears right now. It does. It's not that really big clunk in the low RPMs. Now in high RPM it was always good. It was a low RPM it would clunk really hard. And the tuning takes quite a bit on this bike. It's not just as simple as everyone thinks it is. This bike has limits per gear, and if you overshoot those limits and it doesn't calculate to certain values properly, it goes into a limp mode when you go full throttle. So that's another interesting point where you got to make sure that you tune every single gear properly. And when we checked out the actual individual cylinder tuning, which is what everyone should be doing, especially in a V configuration, to see what cylinder is providing what kind of AFR, the front and the rear banks in this thing are providing the same AFR. So it's great. When you put a sniffer through here, you really get a true idea of what the bike is doing. There's no real bias between the front and the rear cylinder as far as lean and rich goes. Now let's go ahead and check this thing out post flash on the top end. Alright, now we're at the top end stuff here. Oh man, there's so much more power in this bike now. The throttle transition actually is so much better though, but still it is a scary amount of power in the throttle turns. Lucky the brakes are very good on this bike, not having any issues coming to a brake, and when the bike positions its braking stuff, it makes the front suspension stiffer, and when it does that, it doesn't upset the balance as much. It's a pretty intuitive system. It also has slide control. Oh man, this bike can get you into so much trouble. Let's check out low speed throttle transitions. Yep, that's good. Even shifting a corner, good. The exhaust valve is wide open now with the flash. Wow, there's so much power coming out of turns now. And it's manageable, a lot more manageable than before. Oh my god, so much power. This is ridiculous. Oh man, it came right up off the ridge. So much power. I have to lay all over the tank to make sure the tire doesn't come up off the ground. But now the power just seems a lot more manageable, I guess you could say. And it doesn't really matter what gear you're in. I mean, the amount of torque will pull you out of any corner, really. Oh man, this bike is fun. Oh, I like it. That's a lot more manageable, a lot more predictable as far as the power goes. Man, I'm just having a blast on this bike. Looks like I'm stuck in a line now, so why don't we go ahead and check out the post flash 60 through 130 while I'm working my way through here. All right, 60 through 130 post flash. Let's get this thing into race mode. I'm gonna change the actual mode here. Let's put her into track. So we're gonna put everything off on this thing. All the nannies are gone. Even the rear ABS is off. Cool, we got it all in track setting right now. You guys saw that was a 5.7 60 through 130 versus the 6.1, so we gained almost a half a second on that 60 through 130 time, and that was starting in third gear. That kind of gives us a little bit of that mid-range because this bike is so wound up. Usually I start those in second gear, but I did third gear here because second gear is almost unusable as far as power goes. And I wanted to get some of that mid-range in there to show you guys that power that we're making in the mid-range versus just the top end. Now we also did a 100 through 150, and that was a 6.8 point post flash versus an 8.6 pre-flash. So 8.6 stock versus 6.8 flash. Now, if you look at the slopes on the two runs, you'll see it's almost like a degree and a half different of a slope. So why don't we go ahead and give the benefit of the doubt to the stock. Instead of saying 8.6, let's just call it an 8 flat. Now we're still gaining a whole bunch of time even with that, and yes, the slope can matter that much. That's why typically any slope over 1 degree, it'll invalidate the run. I still use those if they're both consistent, but saying as this one was such a difference apart, I'm going to take time off of the stock run and call it an 8.0. So great gains over here on the bike. I'm really happy, especially when we were in the top end stuff and we had a lot better of that throttle transition where I didn't have to worry about sneezing, and we're using the same settings. That was still the same track settings, wheelie control off, track mode, all the nannies completely off, and it is such a smoother throttle transition when you ride them back to back or even day to day that it almost feels like a different bike. I believe that throttle response is exactly what the doctor called for on this bike, especially when you're just cruising around. It doesn't feel as jerky. Down low doesn't feel as jerky. The new ignition timing and fueling we put on the bike really helps smooth out the low end of this bike. Like, look, I'm gonna cruise right here. It's usable at 2,000 RPM. It's usable. Also, along with fixing the fuel mixture of the bike, that yields us a much better and cooler running engine, believe it or not. So another thing I wanted to mention here, we got the fuel light blinking here, which means it's time for me to go get some fuel. But I'm shocked how long this tank lasts. And we said, remember in the beginning, this bike has about a half a gallon more than it did from its predecessor, and you really notice it because I'm filling up a lot less than I did on the 1290, for example. Now, as far as the range goes, pre-flash and post-flash, I'm not noticing a difference, and I've been logging these. Now, of course, if you're more heavy-handed after post-flash and you just like putting your hand down and revving out more, of course it's going to use more fuel. I mean, you're making more power. If you're making more power, you're going to need more air, more fuel, so don't be surprised. But it's, as far as cruising goes, same gas mileage pre and post flash that I'm noticing. So I think overall this flash does a lot of good to the bike. The modes are all still functional, the cruise control is still functional, everything is still functional in this motorcycle as far as all the cool electronic stuff goes. Open up the exhaust valve, we did that. It sounds amazing up there at the top end. We were doing the top end stuff. In my opinion, this is another slam dunk. This bike is completely transformed and for the better. So I think that'll do it for this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.